Hello and welcome to KnightHunter Books. This is the second part of our wrap-up for July and August. This time where we're going to cover the novel-length works that we read over that period.
Mostly. First up are two books that were nominated for an award that was presented at Worldcon, where we were recently. These are In Other Lands by Marie Brennan and Summer in Orcus by Ursula Vernon, also known as T. Kingfisher. Both of these, as we found out on a panel at Worldcon, are very much in dialogue with earlier Portal fantasies. And when I say in dialogue, I get the impression that both authors would quite like to find C.S. Lewis and shake him until his teeth rattles. Summer in Orcus is intended for a slightly younger audience. The protagonist is maybe 12 or 13 at the start of the novel, but the adventure takes place over the course of weeks or months at her time. And in this, she goes to another world, and there she resolves a problem that is plaguing the land, and she does so using skills and attributes that it's perfectly reasonable for a child to have. She's not there because she's, better at swinging a sword than, grown-ups, because that's stupid. She's also assisted in this by a number of characters, notably the warehouse, who spends most of the time as a wolf big enough to ride, but at night turns into a house.
That sounds very useful as an adventuring buddy.
Yes, very much so. In Other Lands is a slightly different take. The protagonist starts out younger at the start of the book, but by the end of the book finishes magic school that he attends on the other side of the portal. In this, it's a little bit like a cross between Harry Potter and Narnia. And he's a pacifist, and he objects to being made to train to be a child soldier because he thinks that's stupid. He's not a big fan of the idea of adult soldiers. He thinks child soldiers are just ridiculous. I have to say, he has a point.
He does also think everything is stupid, though.
True. It should be noted that the protagonist does start out very whiny and kind of annoying. He does get better over the course of the books.
I'm about 10% in, and I'm starting to like him more, but mainly because of the people he's surrounded by.
We caught a night flight back, and this book may have caused some people near us to get a less than restful night after it had me laughing out loud repeatedly. But that's my fault, not the author's. I won't say much more about this because, as you might have gathered, Bex is reading it, so we'll probably do a joint video about it later on.
The first book I read on the holiday was The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, which is a sort of classic, or modern classic, of the science fictional genre, mainly military SF, published in the 70s. And actually I was pleasantly surprised. This book is, I think, quite personal, very much speaking to the author's experiences as a Vietnam veteran and how he felt to return home. In this story, then, soldiers are sent out in a war that's spanning the galaxy, but with a lot of far-distant space travel comes time dilation, which means that the soldiers are aging much slower than people back on Earth or other kind of human planets.
The surviving soldiers, at least.
Yes, the rates aren't great. And that's one thing I liked about it. It wasn't a rosy picture of war. It was very much felt like it wasn't glorifying it. The really interesting bit is the culture shock that they experience, and in particular this main character who returns again and again and sees that more and more time has passed. I will say that the gender norms are not very progressive at the start. It's kind of set in the 90s, but still with sensitivities of the 70s. And
not the cool bits, the 70s.
Yeah. And those are the main characters' feelings about, gender, sexuality, things like that. But the future that the author writes for humanity is actually a lot more progressive. There's actually a whole period of history where there's homonormativity, and the main character feels very out of place. So I wasn't really bothered by the kind of comments that the main character made, because it seemed believable. I didn't feel particularly attached to the characters or the action scenes. I didn't find them particularly riveting, but it was still reasonably quick to read and had some interesting ideas in there. So I rated it 3.5 stars, and I'd recommend it if it sounds like something you want to pick up or you do want to read some of the classics. But it's probably not a bad place to start with military SF. I don't normally read military science fiction, and this didn't feel too much thrown in at the deep end.
Next up is The Stone Sky by the inimitable Nora K. Jemisin, and this is the third in her triply Hugo Award-winning novel trilogy, which, funny enough, is rather good. And she continues to do interesting things with how she tells the story, and explains more of the truly terrifying history of the world, and put her characters in the most awful situations. There's a Twitter thread somewhere out there of authors saying what would happen if their characters came to life and met them. I think Nora would be in serious trouble if any of the protagonists of this met her. They would have words. I'm not going to say that much more about it because it's the final book in a trilogy. If you're one of those people that waits for a whole trilogy to be out before you read it, go and read it. Next up is both a book and a veritable host of short stories. This is Tricks for Free by Seanan McGuire, the 7th in her Encrypted series. It's the second following Antimony Price, the youngest of the Healy Price clan. You could probably just read Magic for Nothing and Tricks for Free as a duology, and that would be a jumping in point to the world if you wanted to. Particularly if theme parks and carnivals and roller derby are your thing, she is going to be your favourite character. The rest of the series follows her siblings, and you get to see relationships from the other point of view, which is interesting. The short stories I'd also recommend if you like the world, because they do paint a fuller picture of the history of the family, how they came to be in America, and how they keep on marrying Covenant agents sent to kill them. The vast majority of these are available on her website. They are quite varied. Some of them are from the point of view of minor characters, some notably from the point of view of monsters, including completely inhuman characters who are telepaths, who are completely face blind, and just move through the world taking what they want. So continue to be recommended, and I'm not sure what she'd have to do to stop me recommending them at this point.
We also both read a book from the same series, Yoon Lee's Machineries of Empire. I read the first book, Ninefox Gambit,
while I read Revenant Gun, the conclusion to the trilogy. First, in summary, I'd say I recommend the entire series. It's really very good, some of the most original SF I've read in a long time. But then that's coming from somebody who's read a lot of SF.
Yeah, and I was expecting this to be quite daunting from what I'd heard, but actually I found it easier to read than I thought. There's definitely a lot of weird words and interesting concepts that I hadn't seen before, but I just kind of moved with the story and was very much hooked into it. It was really good. I rated this 4.5 stars, and that's very high for me. I love the world building in this. It's a kind of space opera, but where the power of the Empire is based on a certain calendar system, which its citizens must observe for it to actually work. And then this system then provides the underlying mathematics that governs their weapons. So everything's all interconnected, but the idea that this is driven by people having the right feast days, or
watching enemies of the Empire be horribly ritualistically tortured.
One thing that I find always quite fun, but I think mostly appears in a lot of YA as well, is that there are very clear factions with, certain job roles, and you can very much come out of it and go, ooh, I'd be in this faction, and I'd be a spy, oh no, I'd be a,
And they've all got logos and colour schemes.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun. My favourite bit, however, was the relationship between the two main characters, one of whom is inside the other one's head, and is a general who wins every battle, so is super useful, but also has a bit of a reputation as a traitor, mass murderer, so has to be kind of kept under control by a normal human. The main character, who is early in her career and given a practically impossible task. And they have to work together, and I ship it.
There's only one body. What is there to ship?
I just love their conversations.
The third book in the series brings everything to a satisfyingly explosive conclusion. But I say conclusion, it feels very much like the end of the beginning. I'm sure more could be written about this world, and I'd happily read it if it was. So far we've seen mostly internal machinations of one empire. There are other races and other people out there. This is quite different in some ways to the earlier books, and follows a protagonist who is both different but familiar. The back of the book is a spoiler for that one, so but I'll let you find that out yourself. Next up is A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, which, along with the rest of its series, was nominated for the Best Series Hugo Award, as was the Encrypted series that I just mentioned. These are the memoirs of a cranky old society lady who knows what she wants, and frankly everybody that she plans to insult over the course of the books is either poorer than her, less powerful than her, or dead already. This is the bare, unvarnished truth in an entirely fictional world where there are dragons. It's got quite a sort of familiar Victorian memoir setup with the chapter headings that tell you what's going to happen, in which we find our new location less than appealing. Unlike most actual Victorian memoirs, the writer is female and not particularly happy with her lot. Our protagonist would much rather be studying dragons than attending society balls. I enjoyed this. I'm not entirely sure how I hadn't picked it up already.
It does sound like your kind of thing.
Yeah, and we'll continue to read the rest, because thanks to the Hugo Award, I've got all of them.
Yes, one of the perks. And then the last thing that I read was How to Stop Time by Matt Haig, which I was quite excited to read after I read The Humans a few years ago by him, and really loved that. And this book is also similarly literary mainly, but with a kind of supernatural twist or speculative twist.
Sounds a little like Claire North, that kind of space that she's carved out.
Yeah. So this book follows a main character with a very rare condition that means that he ages about 10 times slower than an average human. And this book kicks off in present day when this character is about 500 years old. So he's lived a lot. He's
got a stock portfolio.
Not this character, although there are other people with a condition, and as you'd imagine, some of them are quite powerful, which does kind of lead its way into a kind of nice mystery about kind of secret societies and what's really going on. But this main character he's a bit down in the dumps. He's not really sure what the point is anymore, especially as he has sworn to his all-powerful society leader that he definitely would never do anything as silly as falling in love. It alternates between the present day and various points in his life which were kind of particularly pivotal for him and also that kind of tie into things he's thinking about in the present day, which is quite a nice structure. And some of those I really liked. Others felt a little name-droppy, where, you know, he does meet quite a few of the greats of the past 500 years.
Yeah, is that just like, I don't know, unreliable narrator? It's the few bits he remembers of the past, and it's like, well, I was in Paris in the 20s. Of course I met Orwell.
I love Matt Haig's writing. I find it really, really quick to read, but it's quite quotable, and it's just quite positive. I knew that even though the main character, it frustrated me a little bit because every time I put down the book I was like, oh, what would I do with 500 years? I could see where the main character was coming from. There are downsides, but I knew that Matt Haig was going to turn it into a kind of hopeful story in the end, and I appreciated that. I rated this 3.25 stars. Not sure I'd necessarily recommend it unless that kind of literary with a little bit of speculative is your jam. But yeah, so let us know how your summer reading has been going.
One quick aside before we finish. We've recently started editing our videos with a new piece of software called Shotcut, or new to us at least. If there's been a noticeable change for the better or worse, please let us know. Particularly if it's for the worse, because we'll try and fix it. Hopefully we're a bit louder if nothing else. All that said, thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon.